My wife's hand on my shoulder in the dark is the thing I keep coming back to. Not a gentle shake. Not the kind of touch she uses when she wants me to come downstairs and look at something on her phone. This was both hands, gripping, her fingernails through my t-shirt, and she was already dressed. Joel, get up. We have to go. I'm going to tell you exactly how this went, because I think the details matter. I think someday, when I'm trying to make sense of all of it, the details are going to be what I have to hold on to. My name is Joel Carver. I'm 39 years old. I'm a bridge inspection engineer for a state DOT contractor, which is a job that sounds impressive until someone asks you to explain it at a party, and their eyes glaze over in the first 40 seconds. I'd been out on a week-long infrastructure survey about 60 miles from home, staying at a roadside motel that smelled like carpet cleaner and old smoke. And I'd driven back the night before because Diane had a thing Thursday evening she wanted me home for, some dinner with her cousin. I was tired in the specific way you get tired, after a week of climbing around on bridge decks with a clipboard and a crack measuring device, where your shoulders ache in places that shouldn't be able to ache, and I'd been asleep since maybe 9:30. It was 4 in the morning. Diane's hands on my shoulder, and I said something like, "Wha," and tried to roll over. She didn't let me. "Joel," Gwen called. "Something is happening." Gwen is her younger sister. Gwen is a nurse. She works nights at County General, which is about 20 miles from our house in a town called Harwick. Our town is smaller, called Delman, about 4,000 people, the kind of place that has a Dairy Queen and a Family Dollar, and a lot of people who graduated high school together and never quite left. We'd been there 6 years, long enough to know our neighbors by name, short enough that we still sometimes felt like we were just visiting. I sat up. Diane had her phone in her hand, and the screen was bright enough to make both of us squint. "What kind of something?" She started talking fast. I'm going to compress what she said, because at the time, I was still not fully awake, and I didn't fully process all of it. What I got. Gwen had called about 40 minutes earlier. She'd been at work at the hospital. They'd had 4 patients come in through the ER, all within a short window, all with the same kind of injuries, bite wounds on the arms and necks. Not animal bites, human bites, and 2 of the staff members who had tried to restrain one of the patients had been hurt pretty badly. The word Gwen used, according to Diane, was frenzied. She kept saying these patients were frenzied. They didn't respond to anything. They weren't talking. They were just trying to get at people. And then Gwen had said there were reports of roadblocks going up on Route 17 and the highway bypass, which was where you'd go if you were coming from the direction of Harwick toward our area. Gwen had told Diane, "Get out. Leave now. Don't wait until morning." I'm not going to pretend I took that seriously at first. Here's the thing about 4 a.m. information. It comes through a layer of static. Your brain isn't running at full capacity. Diane's sister worked nights and worked trauma, and she had a baseline level of anxiety about the world that sometimes outpaced what the world was actually doing. I sat on the edge of the bed and I thought, okay, there's something weird going on at a hospital 40 miles away. That's concerning. That's not a reason to pack the truck in the dark. Diane read whatever was on my face and said, "I already looked it up." She showed me her phone. There were 2 Twitter posts from people in Harwick. One of them said something like, "What is happening downtown right now? I can hear screaming." The other one was a video, and I'm going to be honest. I watched about 8 seconds of it before I handed the phone back to her and said, "Okay, let's pack." I don't know how to describe what was in that video, in a way that doesn't sound like I'm reaching for words that don't quite fit. A parking lot of some kind, overhead lights, 2 people running across the frame, one of them falling, and then a third person, a fourth, it was hard to count, who was not running so much as sort of lurching in a fast, lurching, wrong speed way. And then the video stopped. 8 seconds. I handed the phone back. "Okay," I said, "let's pack." Here's where my brain did something I wasn't expecting. I have a specific job. A specific, unusual job that involves knowing about infrastructure that most people don't think about. I've spent 2 weeks of the past year on bridges that aren't on any GPS map. I know about service roads that run parallel to highways. I know about maintenance access points and restricted access routes. and the gaps between where public roads end and where the actual working parts of the system begin. This is stuff I don't think about consciously most of the time. It just lives in there, a layer of practical knowledge sitting under everything else. When Diane said let's go and I started moving, my brain went immediately to, not the highway, not Route 7 through town, not the bridge on County Road D, which I knew had some cracking at the deck joints I'd flagged for follow-up. My brain went to a map I'd had in my head for 6 months, from a survey I'd done on the watershed maintenance roads in our district. An old inspection route that ran from a county drainage facility near Delman all the way out to the Kellam Dam compound about 30 miles northeast. It was gravel mostly, unmarked. You had to know the access point was behind the old grain elevator on Sutter Road. I don't know why that was the first thing my head produced. Fight or flight maybe, or maybe 14 years of knowing what roads most people don't know made that the automatic answer. We had 22 minutes between when Diane said let's pack and when we pulled out of the driveway. I'll tell you what I grabbed because later on those choices mattered. From the garage, my work bag, which already had in it my inspection tools, flashlight, backup flashlight, measuring tape, wire brush for cleaning cracks before you photo them, a utility knife, a pry bar about 14 inches long, work gloves, safety glasses, a spare set of batteries, a first aid kit that was real and stocked because I went to a job site once with nothing and split my palm open on corroded rebar and bled through my shirt driving to the urgent care. Also in the garage, a second flashlight that we kept on a hook by the door, a hand-cranked emergency radio we'd gotten after a tornado watch 2 summers ago and never used, a sleeping bag and a compression sack that I'd had since college, jump cables, 2 cans of Fix-A-Flat, my toolbox, the big red one with the metal drawers, which is heavy enough that I thought twice, but I put it in the truck anyway, because I remember thinking we might need to get into something, or fix something, and I'd regret leaving it. Diane grabbed things too. She's more organized than I am under normal circumstances, and significantly more organized than I am at 4 a.m. on about 5 hours of sleep. She came out with 2 reusable bags full of pantry stuff, cans of soup, a jar of peanut butter, crackers, nuts, a thing of protein bars, 2 boxes of cereal, dried pasta, a can opener. She grabbed our water filter, the Sawyer squeeze we'd bought for a camping trip we'd taken twice, and filled 3 plastic water bottles from the tap, and grabbed a case of water from under the kitchen island. She got the prescription medications we both took. Mine was just a blood pressure thing, nothing critical, but she grabbed it. She got the little safe from the hall closet that had our documents in it, passports and birth certificates, and the deed to the house. She got both our phone chargers and a portable power bank. She got a blanket and a pillow. I threw in the 2 5-gallon fuel cans from the garage that I kept filled for the generator. About 9 gallons of gas total in addition to whatever was in the truck tank, which I'd filled 2 days ago on the way back from the survey, so it was full. That's what we had. In 22 minutes. You make choices fast, and you live with them. The house. I stood at the front door for a second and looked at it. Our hall table with the keys on the hook. The living room couch you could see from the doorway. It smelled like dinner, something Diane had made with garlic. I locked the door because I didn't know what else to do with my hands, and I got in the truck. It was 4:23 in the morning. Delman was quiet. That kind of dark quiet that 4 in the morning has in a small town, where people get up at 6 but not before. The streetlights, the closed gas station at the corner of Oak and Main, where the sign still said the price of premium. Our truck was the only thing moving, and I took the back way out of our neighborhood because that was faster to Sutter Road, and as I was driving, I was already thinking through the maintenance route. "Can you get Gwen back?" I asked Diane. She tried, 4 times over the next 10 minutes. No answer. We got on Sutter Road heading east, and I noticed the first thing then, there was a car stopped in the middle of the road about a 1/4 mile ahead. Not pulled over. Stopped. In the middle of the lane, no hazard lights. I slowed down and went around it on the shoulder, and when we got alongside it, I could see it was empty. Both front doors hanging open. Not crashed. Just stopped and left. Diane said, "That's weird." I said, "Yeah, that's all we said about it." The entrance to the maintenance road is behind a corrugated metal grain elevator that hasn't been in active use since the 90s. There's a chain across the access road, and a sign that says restricted access, authorized vehicles only, and there's a combination lock on the chain. I knew the combination because I'd been on that road 3 times in the past year, and the combination was the same for every watershed maintenance access point in the county, 4412. Nobody changes them. The guys who work on these roads are out there twice a year maybe, and they use the same combination for everything because they're not thinking about security. They're thinking about not getting stuck in mud 2 miles from anywhere. I got out of the truck and it was cold, mid-October, and there was frost on the dead grass along the fence line, and my breath was visible when the truck headlights caught it. I got the chain off and pulled the truck through, and got out and put the chain back up and relocked it behind us. That detail. I didn't have to do that, but I did. I think I was already thinking about the maintenance compound at the other end of this road, and whether we wanted anyone being able to follow us there without effort. The maintenance road is gravel, and mostly straight. It runs along the backside of a drainage district through agricultural land, and in the dark, with the headlights on it, looked like a corridor of pale rock going forward, and nothing on either side. Diane had the radio on, AM, because the FM stations from our area were just dead air, static on all of them. "That's not normal," she said. She meant the FM stations being down. She was right, it wasn't. There's a repeater on the hill above Delman, and even in bad weather it usually holds. The AM caught something about 15 minutes in. Emergency broadcast, not the weekly test, the actual tone, and then a voice reading off county names. Our county was on the list. The next county was on the list. The voice said, "Residents are advised to remain in their homes and to avoid all unnecessary travel." The voice said, "Law enforcement and emergency services are responding to multiple incidents." The voice said, "Stay inside, lock your doors. Do not open your door for anyone behaving erratically." Diane and I looked at each other. I kept driving. The thing I couldn't reconcile, sitting in that truck in the dark with the gravel pinging off the undercarriage, was that you hear emergency broadcasts about floods and chemical spills and weather events. You don't hear them about people behaving erratically. That's a specific piece of language that doesn't fit any of the standard templates. I've heard enough emergency broadcasts to know what they sound like when someone's reading from a prepared script for a known situation. This didn't sound like that. This sounded like someone reading from something written in the past hour by someone who didn't have the right words yet. We drove for about 40 minutes on that maintenance road. Diane tried Gwen twice more. She tried her mother in Ohio, who picked up on the 3rd ring and sounded half asleep and confused. Diane told her something was happening, and to stay inside, and her mother said, "What do you mean, what's happening?" And Diane said she didn't know yet, just stay inside. And her mother said, "Should I call your father?" And Diane said, "Yes, call Dad." And then the call dropped. I thought about my own father, Walt Carver, 68. He lived in a town called Belfield, which is about 55 miles from Delman, in the opposite direction from where we were going. He lived alone in a house he'd been in since 1987, a 2-story colonial on a street called Maple Court that he refused to leave even after he retired, and even after he had a minor cardiac event 2 years ago that had scared the hell out of all of us. He'd been a mechanic his whole working life. He'd probably forget to charge his phone if he woke up to some kind of emergency. He'd probably go outside to see what the fuss was about. I pushed that thought down and focused on the road. The maintenance route eventually meets a gravel service road that runs along the eastern side of the Kellam watershed, and if you follow that road for another 6 or 7 miles, you come to the Kellam Dam maintenance compound. I'd been there twice. It wasn't a dramatic place. It wasn't the dam itself, just the support facility. A cluster of 5 or 6 buildings behind a chain-link fence with razor wire on top. The kind of utilitarian layout that exists to service equipment and house personnel during maintenance operations. There was a main office building, a large equipment bay, a fuel storage area with diesel and regular storage tanks, a smaller building that I thought was a generator room, and a couple of mobile units that I'd always assumed were temporary, but had clearly been there for years, based on how settled they looked on their blocks. The reason I knew this place at all was that my DOT contract required me to survey the access roads to the dam twice a year. because the access roads crossed two bridges, and those bridges fell under my inspection responsibility. I knew that the compound had a watchman rotation, not 24 hours, just 2 or 3 days a week. A state employee who drove out there, checked on things, logged readings from the dam monitoring systems, and left. I'd met that person twice. Both times it was a guy named Larry, who was in his mid-50s and drove a pickup and was always very tired. I knew the compound gate had a key lockbox, and I knew the lockbox code because Larry had given it to me once when I'd arrived to inspect the access bridges on a day he wasn't there. I know. You're reading this and thinking, how does someone just happen to have that information at the exact right moment? And I think the answer is just that I'm the kind of person who writes things down and remembers them for reasons I can't always explain. The code was in a notes file on my phone. I'd put it there the day Larry told it to me, because I'd thought at the time I might need to get out here without him someday. I didn't know what I meant by that when I thought it. Just seemed like useful information to have. The compound gate was locked when we got there. It was 6:12 in the morning, and the sky was starting to get that pre-dawn gray that isn't actually light yet, but makes things visible. The razor wire on the chain-link fence was wet and dull in that light. Diane had fallen asleep about 10 minutes before we arrived, her head against the window, and I didn't want to wake her. I got out and got the lockbox open on the third try because my hands were cold, and I was reading the numbers on my phone screen and misentering them. The code was 7734. The gate swung in. I drove the truck inside, got out, and closed and locked the gate behind us. I sat back in the truck. Diane was breathing the slow way she breathes when she's actually asleep, and not just resting with her eyes closed. And I looked at the compound, the office building, the equipment bay with its roll-up door, the fuel tanks on their concrete pad over to the right, and I turned the engine off. And I sat there. Because here's what was catching up to me. We'd left our house 4 hours ago, based on a phone call from Diane's sister, and 8 seconds of a video on Twitter, and an emergency broadcast on AM radio. I had not called anyone from law enforcement. I had not actually confirmed that what we'd seen in that video was what I thought it was. My brain, in the middle of the night, had classified it and acted on it, and driven us 40 miles down an unmarked gravel road to a locked government compound. Either I'd just done the best possible thing, or I was going to feel extremely stupid in a few hours when it turned out there'd been some kind of localized incident in Harwick and everything was fine. I got my emergency radio out of the back and turned it on. FM was still dead. AM had 2 things. The emergency broadcast, still cycling, still reading county names. The list of counties now longer than it had been an hour ago. And one other thing. A station that was broadcasting voices. Not a formal broadcast, just what sounded like someone talking into a radio. Male voice, breathless, saying a series of street names and then a number, and then someone else responding and saying another number. I couldn't figure out what it meant. It sounded like an informal dispatch of some kind. Police channel maybe, bleeding onto AM. Then a third voice cut in over both of them. We have confirmed fatalities at St. Catherine's and at the Riverside District. I repeat, confirmed fatalities. Do not respond to Riverside without full PPE. I do not know if that's even, and then static. I sat with that for a second. Then I reached over and put my hand on Diane's shoulder. Hey. She woke up the way she always does. Instantly, eyes open, already present. Are we there? We're there. She looked at the compound through the windshield. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Okay, what do we do first?" "That's my wife. That's exactly who she is." I said, "Find out if there's anything useful in these buildings, then figure out what we actually know." She nodded. We got out of the truck. The equipment bay had a standard padlock on a hasp. I tried the same combination as the gate lockbox. Government facilities in the same watershed district sometimes use the same master codes, and I'd noticed this before. It didn't work. I tried the gate code. Didn't work. I went back to the office building, which had a lockbox next to the door, and tried the same gate code there, and that one opened. Inside the office it was cold, and smelled like old coffee grounds and heating oil. Fluorescent lights on a switch by the door. Desk, filing cabinets, a workbench along one wall, a pegboard with keys on labeled hooks. The equipment bay key was on the third hook. One of those small facts that in any other context would be completely unremarkable. The equipment bay was large enough to house 2 pieces of heavy equipment, and it had one, a tracked loader, the small kind you use to move material in tight spaces, an older Bobcat T250, a zero-turn riding mower with the deck removed, shelves along the wall with maintenance supplies, hydraulic fluid, motor oil, chains, steel stakes, sandbags, rope, fuel line, duct tape, wire, cable ties, a first aid kit of the industrial variety, a box of N95 masks, PVC pipe in various diameters. In the far corner, a rack of hand tools, shovels, picks, bolt cutters, a sledgehammer, a post driver. On the back wall, behind the Bobcat, a steel cabinet, locked, but with a small hole in the back panel, where the mounting bolts had been removed at some point, and someone had used the lock to secure it, but not properly reclosed the panel. I looked at Diane. She looked at me. I got the pry bar out of my work bag and spent about 2 minutes working the panel back enough to look inside. Shotgun, 12-gauge pump, and a box of shells, maybe 35, 40 rounds. I stood there looking at it. I'm not a gun person. I grew up around guns. My dad had hunting rifles. I'd shot things at a range a few times, but I don't own one. Never felt the need. And in any normal context, finding an unsecured firearm in a government equipment locker would be something you'd report. I stood there looking at it for maybe 30 seconds. Then I opened the panel wider and took the shotgun and the shells and carried them to the truck. Diane didn't say anything. Neither did I. By the time we'd finished the first walkthrough of the compound, it was close to 8 in the morning, and the sky was fully light. Cold, clear, the kind of October morning that looks like a photograph. I climbed on top of the equipment bay roof, using a ladder I found leaning against the back of the building. It was elevated enough that I could see over the tree line to the south. Black smoke, 2 columns of it, one thicker than the other, maybe 6 or 7 miles away, in the direction of Delman, and to the southwest, faint, another column, in the direction of where Route 17 would be. I stood up there for a while and looked at the smoke. My phone had signal, barely, 1 bar. I called my dad. 4 rings, 5, his voicemail. His voice saying, "You've reached Walt Carver. I can't come to the phone. Leave me a message." "Dad, it's Joel. Pick up if you can. Something's going on. I don't know what yet. Me and Diane are safe. We're at a safe location. Call me back the second you get this. Don't go outside." I climbed down. Let me tell you what the first 2 hours were like, the real practical texture of them, because I think you can learn something from how a person responds to the unknown. Some of this is not flattering. I walked in circles for a while. Not literally. I walked around the compound checking things, which was useful. But the interior of my head was doing something that circles is about the only word for. One part of me was thinking practically and cataloging resources. Another part of me was telling the first part that this was all going to turn out to be nothing. A third part was telling both of them to shut up and focus. A fourth part, smaller and sitting in the back, kept thinking about 8 seconds of a parking lot video and a voice on a radio saying confirmed fatalities, and Diane's hands gripping my shoulder. That fourth part was the one I was listening to. Around 8:30, the AM radio picked up something clearer, an actual broadcast, not just voices talking over each other. A woman identifying herself as a public safety officer from the State Emergency Management Division, reading from what sounded like prepared language. She said there had been multiple violent incidents across 17 counties overnight. She said the cause was under investigation. She said residents should shelter in place. She said to limit contact with individuals exhibiting aggressive behavior. She said do not approach, do not engage. She said law enforcement and National Guard units were being deployed. 17 counties. That was approximately a quarter of the state. I went inside and sat down at the desk in the office, and I put my hands flat on the desk, and I breathed. Diane came in behind me. She put her hand on the back of my neck. She said, "I'm going to make us something to eat." I said, "How?" She said, "The electric is on. There's a microwave." There was a microwave. There was also a small coffee maker and a half-empty bag of grounds in the cabinet above it, and a case of water in the corner. I hadn't noticed on the first pass. She made soup from one of the cans she'd brought, and she made coffee, and we sat in the office at a government-issue laminate desk and ate canned tomato soup with crackers and drank black coffee while the emergency broadcast played on the radio on the windowsill. I've had better breakfasts. I've also had worse. Here's the thing I didn't tell Diane right then, because I was still processing it. When I'd been walking the perimeter of the compound earlier, I'd found something in the second mobile unit that I hadn't expected. The mobile unit was locked. A proper deadbolt, not a key lockbox. But the window on the south side had been broken, and someone had covered it from the inside with duct tape and cardboard. Old duct tape. Not from this week. The cardboard was weathered at the edges where it met the window frame. Someone had broken that window a while ago, maybe months ago, and covered it and left it. That wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was that when I'd put my flashlight through the gap where the cardboard didn't quite meet the frame, I'd seen the inside of the room. And on the floor, in the corner, there had been a sleeping bag, and beside the sleeping bag, a plastic bag full of empty cans, and a water bottle. Someone had been living in that mobile unit. Not this week, and not last week, but not a year ago either. The empty cans looked like they'd been there a few months. No dust on the sleeping bag, or less dust than there should be if it had been sitting there untouched for a year. I didn't tell Diane about this, because I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't want to add unknowns to her plate before I had to. But I was thinking about it. Someone had known about this compound. Someone had used it. Someone who wasn't an official state employee. Which meant I wasn't the only person who knew this place existed. Which raised a question I wasn't ready to answer yet. Where had that person gone? Had they left? Or were they somewhere nearby? The morning passed in a way that is hard to explain. It felt both very long and very compressed. We did useful things. We unloaded the truck and organized everything in the office, stacking the food supplies along one wall and the tools and equipment along another. I found a map of the compound in a filing cabinet drawer, an architectural blueprint type thing, and it confirmed the layout I'd already mapped in my head. 5 structures: main office, equipment bay, generator building, 2 mobile units, plus the fuel pad, with 2 above-ground storage tanks, 1 diesel for the equipment, 1 regular for vehicles, and smaller engines. The tanks had gauge windows on the side. Diesel was about half full, probably 200 gallons. Regular was lower, maybe 60 gallons. I found a generator in the generator building that ran on diesel, industrial-sized, enough to power the whole compound. I didn't start it yet because I didn't want to make noise. That instinct, don't make noise, was the first one that surprised me. It came in without me thinking about it. Around 10:30 I climbed back onto the equipment bay roof and looked south again. The smoke columns were larger. There were now 3, and a 4th one that was smaller and in a different direction, east-southeast, where I thought the Harwick Hospital complex was. And there was something else. I could hear something, not clearly, not distinctly, more like a frequency in the air than an actual identifiable sound. Something between a hum and a drone, like distant traffic but not quite, like a crowd sound but not quite. I stood up there for a long time listening to it. When I came down, Diane was standing in the equipment bay door. "Gwen finally called back," she said. Her voice was steady, but her face wasn't. "What did she say?" Diane didn't say anything right away. She looked at her hands. Then she said it started in the hospital, in the ER. The patients who came in, she said some of them died and then they weren't. She said they weren't staying dead, Joel. She said they were getting up. She said she got out through the loading dock with 2 other nurses. She said she didn't know where she was. She was walking. She said the city was. She stopped. I said, where was she when she called? She didn't know. She said a road, trees on both sides. She said she was going to keep walking north and try to find somewhere. I looked at the map on the desk. Gwen's hospital was in Harwick. If she was heading north on a road with trees on both sides, she might be on County Road 9, which was the back way out of Harwick in that direction. County Road 9 connected, if you knew where to turn, with the same watershed maintenance road we'd come in on. Did she say anything else? She said don't call back. She said she was turning her phone off to save battery. She said she'd try again when she could. We looked at each other. Diane said, patients dying and then getting up. I said, I know. She said, you believe that? I said, I believe she said it, which was my careful way of saying yes. You want to know what the weirdest part of all of this is? The thing I couldn't shake even in those first hours? The thing that still makes my stomach twist a little when I think about it. I'd been on those access roads 100 times. I'd been to this compound twice. I knew about the service road, the gate code, the key in the office, the tool rack in the bay. All of that practical knowledge that lives in an infrastructure engineer's head, like a map nobody else can read. And every single bit of it had clicked into place in the 20 minutes between Diane's hands on my shoulder and pulling out of the driveway. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know if it means anything or if it just means that preparation and information are the things that save you when everything goes sideways. I've been turning it over for weeks now. Days out here have a lot of space in them for that kind of turning. Anyway, it was around noon when I heard the car. We'd been quiet all morning. No generator, no loud tools. The compound sits in a low spot surrounded by tree lines on 3 sides, and the dam access road on the 4th. And sounds don't carry far in either direction. So when I heard a vehicle engine somewhere to the south, coming up the access road, it took me a second to figure out what I was hearing. Diane heard it too. She was in the office and came to the equipment bay door. I said, "Get inside." She said, "Who is it?" I said, "I don't know." "Get inside. Close the door." I got the shotgun. I want to be clear about my state of mind at that moment. I was scared. Not panicked. I don't think I was panicked. But my hands were doing a thing they sometimes do when I'm nervous. A faint shaking that isn't voluntary, and that I'm always slightly embarrassed about. I stood to the side of the equipment bay door, where I could see through the gap between the roll-up door and the frame, and I watched the gate. The car that came through, the gate was locked, but someone got out, and I heard the combination lock. And I thought, they know the code, and my whole chest went tight. Was a Ford Escape, maybe 2018, blue-gray, dusty. A man got out of it. Mid-50s, I thought, heavy around the middle, wearing work clothes, Carhartt jacket, baseball cap. He stood by the car and looked around. He was alone. He walked toward the office building, and when he got close to it, he stopped and looked at my truck, which was parked in front of the equipment bay. He stood there for a moment. I said through the gap in the door, keeping my voice low, "Hey." He jumped about a foot. "Who's there?" "Someone who got here first," I said. "You alone?" A pause. Yeah, I'm alone. "My name's Ray Fielder. I do road maintenance for the county. You're not supposed to be in there." "I know," I said. "Come around to the side of this building. Keep your hands where I can see them." He came around the side of the building. I'd come out through the personnel door. When he saw the shotgun, he stopped walking. "Whoa, okay, hey." "I'm not pointing it at you," I said, which was true. I had it down. "I just want to know who you are. You said road maintenance?" "Yeah, Ray Fielder. I'm a foreman on the county road crew. I've been out here a dozen times for maintenance work. I know this compound." He looked around. "Something's happening. I was at home when..." He stopped, swallowed. I had my scanner going. Police band. I heard things. I grabbed some gear, and I didn't know where else to go. "I live 5 miles from here." I looked at him for a long moment. He said, "You look like you came prepared." I said, "My wife did." He almost laughed. It came out strange, like someone who forgot how laughing works for a second. His name was Ray Fielder, and he was 54, and he'd been divorced for 3 years, and he had an adult daughter in the city who wasn't answering her phone. He drove a county road truck most days, and he knew every back road and maintenance route in our watershed district, which made him about the most useful person I could have run into. He also had, in the back of his Escape, 2 5-gallon water jugs, a heavy bag of rice and dried beans, a tackle box full of fishing gear, a hunting rifle with 2 boxes of ammunition, and a first aid kit bigger than mine. He also had a CB radio. I'd forgotten about CB. That made me feel genuinely stupid for a second. I'd been on AM. I'd been checking my phone. I hadn't once thought about CB. But a county road foreman who's been working rural areas for 25 years had a CB in his vehicle like it was 1987. And it turned out that was the most useful communication tool we had for the next 3 days. By early afternoon, the three of us, Diane, Ray, and I, had done a full inventory of what we had. It took about 2 hours, and I wrote everything down on a yellow legal pad from the office desk. Food. Enough for 3 people for maybe 12 to 14 days, if we were eating conservatively. More if we stretched it. Water. The compound had a tap that ran from the watershed system, not municipal water, and I didn't know what its status was. But Ray knew there was a hand pump on the back side of the equipment bay that connected to a shallow well for equipment washing. He thought the well was clean but wasn't sure how recently it had been tested. We had the Sawyer filter. Fuel, 200 gallons of diesel, plus the 60 of regular, plus my 2 5-gallon cans. That was significant. Weapons, the shotgun and Ray's hunting rifle. About 75 rounds of mixed ammunition between us. Communication, 1 CB radio, 1 hand-crank AM/FM emergency radio, 3 cell phones with varying amounts of battery. Tools, significant. Between my work bag, the compound's equipment bay, and Ray's truck, we had more hand tools than I could list. The Bobcat loader that I didn't yet know how to operate but that Ray had used before. Medications, mine, Diane's, a bottle of ibuprofen and some antihistamines from the first aid kit. Shelter. The office building was solid. Concrete block construction, single story. 2 mobile units we hadn't fully explored yet. That was what we had. Ray had heard things on the scanner and the CB that I hadn't. He filled us in over an early dinner. Soup again. I know. And what he said was this. It had started in the bigger cities first. Reports from overnight of violent incidents in hospital ERs and drunk tanks and shelters. Then it spread. Not fast at first. Slowly. Then fast. By morning, the highway system had been locked down in 3 directions from Harwick. Route 17 was closed both ways. There were no official explanations being given. Just barriers and law enforcement and people being turned back. The National Guard had been activated and deployed. The emergency broadcast was real and was not a drill and was not related to a chemical spill or a weather event. He said, "On the CB this morning before I left, I heard someone saying it was like a rabies thing. Fast acting. You got bit and it went through you quick." I said, "How quick?" He said, "Hours. Less than a day." Diane said, "Gwen said she said they were dying and then getting back up." Ray looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "I heard that too. On the scanner. Someone said the same thing." We sat with that for a while. Diane said, "What does that mean, getting back up?" Ray said, "I think it means what it sounds like." Nobody said anything. I went outside after that. Just needed to move. I walked the perimeter fence, chain link, 8 feet high, razor wire, which is about 300 yards total. The fence was in good shape. The gate was solid. On the north side, past the fence, was a dense stand of pines that ran all the way to the dam access road, about 120 yards away. On the south side, past the fence, was a field, about 200 yards of open ground before the tree line where we'd come from. On the east side, just beyond the fence, was the edge of the watershed drainage channel, a concrete-lined channel about 15 feet wide and 3 feet deep that carried water from the dam outflow. I walked the whole perimeter and I looked at it the way I look at infrastructure. Load points, weak points, what would fail under stress, where pressure would build. The gate was the obvious point. That was where I'd need to pay attention. I went back inside and sat with the yellow legal pad. Supplies check, fence check, shelter check, weapons check. Then I wrote at the bottom of the page, "Dad, Belfield was 55 miles from here, give or take. Normal drive was about an hour." I didn't know what the roads were like now. I didn't know if the infection, I was using the word to myself by this point, infection, had reached Belfield yet. It had started in the bigger population centers, according to Ray, and Belfield was not a big population center. It was, in fact, even smaller than Delman. It might be okay. My dad might be fine. He might be sitting at his kitchen table right now reading the newspaper and drinking bad coffee, slightly confused about why there was an emergency broadcast on the radio, planning to call me when he found his glasses. I called him again, voicemail, and I sat there looking at the name I'd written at the bottom of the yellow legal pad and thought, how long do I wait before I go? The second day is where things started to change shape. I need to explain something about the compound before I go on, because the layout of it matters for what happened. The compound is on a slight rise above the surrounding land. Not much, maybe 6 or 8 feet, but enough that water drains away from it in all directions, which is by design, because you don't want flooding around heavy equipment. The access road comes in from the south. The watershed drainage channel is to the east. To the north, past the pines, is the dam access road. And beyond that, you can see the earthen dam itself from the compound fence, if you know where to look. Just the top of it, the grass-covered crest, about a half-mile away. The dam itself isn't huge. It's a regional watershed control structure, about 40 feet high and maybe 200 feet across. Kellam Lake behind it is about 300 acres. The reason all of this matters, the dam created a natural barrier to the north and east. The drainage channel was too deep and fast to cross easily on foot, which meant the open approaches to the compound were from the south and west. I walked the fence a lot in those early days, more than I needed to probably, but I was thinking like an engineer, which is the only way I know how to think, and I was cataloging what needed to happen. Day 2 started with something that changed my calculus significantly. At around 6 in the morning, I'd been up since 4:30. I wasn't sleeping well. I was in the equipment bay looking at the Bobcat when Ray came in from outside. He said, "There's something in the south field." I followed him out. In the south field, about 150 yards from the compound fence, there was a figure, walking, slow, uneven, in a direction that wasn't clearly toward anything, just moving. It was still dim, early gray light. I couldn't see the figure well. It was a person, or it had been, wearing what looked like dark pants and a light jacket, moving in that wrong speed way, the way the person in the video had moved. Ray and I stood at the fence line and watched it. It didn't seem to notice the compound. It moved in a rough arc across the south field, changing direction a couple of times for no apparent reason, and then it went into the tree line at the far end of the field and was gone. We went back inside. I said, "It didn't react to us." Ray said, "No." I said, "We were standing at the fence." "It was 150 yards away." Ray said, "It's the distance, maybe, or we didn't make noise." That matched what I'd been piecing together from the emergency broadcast, from the CB traffic Ray had been monitoring, from what Diane had told me Gwen said, the things these people had become. I still had trouble with words like infected, like zombies, like undead, because I'm a practical person, and words like that live in movies, not in my life. They operated on stimulus, sound, movement. They didn't think. They didn't plan. They didn't look at a locked gate and figure out that there might be people inside. They moved toward noise and they moved away from quiet. Don't make noise. That instinct from the first morning. My brain had already been working this out before I'd consciously articulated it. "We need to be quiet," I said. "Generator stays off unless we absolutely need it. Trucks don't run inside the fence unless we need to move them. No shouting." Ray said, "Agreed." We told Diane. She'd already arrived at the same conclusion on her own. Day 2 brought something else. The CB started getting more traffic. Not law enforcement traffic. That had mostly gone quiet, which was either because they were using encrypted channels or because there weren't enough of them left to broadcast. This was civilian traffic. People on whatever CB radios they had, some clearly in vehicles, some stationary. Most of it was fragmented and hard to follow, but some of it told us things. The main highway through our county was closed and there had been significant casualties there. There was a large population of infected moving through the valley south of Harwick. Moving through was the phrase people used, as if describing a herd of something. There were survivors at a few known locations. Someone mentioned a church. Someone mentioned a high school gymnasium. There was nothing about a coordinated rescue or National Guard extraction. There was a lot of confusion about whether the National Guard was functional. One person on the CB said, "I talked to a guardsman this morning, and he said they're just as lost as we are." That was the sentence that made me put the legal pad down. Because rescue requires someone to know where you are, and someone to be able to get to you. And if the guard was just as lost as everyone else, then the concept of being rescued, sitting tight and waiting for someone to come with answers, was a fantasy, not a plan. I told Diane and Ray what I'd decided. I said, "We're not waiting for rescue. It's not coming anytime soon. We need to act like this is it, for the foreseeable future." Ray said, "Agreed." Diane said, "Okay, so what does that mean?" I said, "It means we fortify this place. It means we make sure we have enough supplies to stay for a significant amount of time. It means we figure out how to get clean water without relying on the well alone. It means we secure the fence." Then I said, "And it means I have to figure out how to go get my dad." Diane looked at me. She'd known this was coming. She didn't fight it. She said, "Not yet." I said, "No, not yet, but soon." The work of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th days. I want to give you this in some detail because I think the specifics of it matter. The texture of what survival actually looks like when it's practical rather than dramatic. Day 3. Ray taught me to operate the Bobcat. 30 minutes of instruction in the equipment bay, talking in low voices, then slow, careful practice in the compound yard. By the afternoon, I could operate it at a basic level. Scoop, lift, dump, move. That evening we drove it to the south side of the fence and used the bucket to push the largest rocks from the drainage channel edge into a rough berm along the outside of the fence, from the southwest corner to about 2/3 of the way across the south face. Not a wall, a speed bump, something that would slow movement and create noise. Day 4. We explored the second mobile unit properly. I'd been keeping the broken window to myself, but now I brought Ray and Diane to see it. We got in through the window. I broke more of the glass, cleared the frame, and inside, along with the sleeping bag and the empty cans, there were 2 other things I hadn't seen in my flashlight check. A notebook, spiral-bound, small, the kind you'd carry in a jacket pocket. About half the pages were used. And a radio, a different kind than our CB, smaller, handheld, a more modern model. It was out of power. The notebook was the thing that kept us up that night. The first entry was dated about 7 months ago. The handwriting was precise and slightly cramped, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who learned it carefully. It said, "Found this place again. Good as I remembered. Spending a few nights. Nobody comes midweek." The entries after that were irregular. Sometimes a week apart, sometimes a month. They read like the records of someone using the compound as a base of operations for something, but it wasn't clear what. There were references to checking the drop. 3 times that phrase appeared, and references to someone called T, and references to a route that went north to the dam road and then east, though east to where wasn't clear. One entry said, "T says the schedule changed. We need another way in, maybe the spillway road." And then there was a gap of 3 months in the dates. And then a final entry, undated. "Have to leave. Something's coming. I'll know more in a week, or I won't know anything." I read that last line twice. Diane said, "That last entry, does that say what I think it says?" I said, "I don't know. It might just mean he was leaving because of something unrelated." Ray said, "Or it might mean someone knew this was going to happen." We sat with that. I don't want to overstate it. People write dramatic things in notebooks all the time that don't mean anything. Something's coming could mean anything from a storm to a divorce to a difficult conversation. I'm not suggesting that whoever wrote that notebook had foreknowledge of a zombie outbreak. I'm just telling you what was in the notebook because it was strange, and because strange things were piling up. We charged the handheld radio using a cable from Ray's escape and a portable battery bank. When it came on, it had access to frequencies we didn't have on the CB. We found, on day 4 afternoon, a signal on one of those frequencies that was broadcasting a repeating message. A man's voice, calm, saying, "If you can hear this, there is a settlement at Kellam Dam, North Access Point. We have food, water, and medical capability. Use the dam service road and proceed to the north gate. Flash your lights twice, if you can hear this." And then it would repeat. We looked at each other. The north access point of the dam was about 800 yards from where we were sitting. There were people at the dam. Ray said, "That could be old." A recorded message playing on a loop. I said, "Could be, but the frequency's live." Diane said, "Should we go find out?" I thought about it. Not yet. Not until we know more. I didn't fully trust it. A broadcast like that, in conditions like these, could be genuine. Or it could be something else. I'd read enough disaster stories to know that people do bad things in bad situations, that a broadcast promising food and medical capability could be a way of drawing people to a place where other people with worse intentions were waiting. I know that sounds paranoid. Maybe it was. But the notebook in the mobile unit, MT, and the drop, and someone knowing this compound and using it months before all this started, it all made me cautious in a way I couldn't fully explain. We kept listening. We didn't respond. Not yet. On day 5, I found the second entrance. I'd been exploring the north side of the compound, along the fence line, and I was doing what I always do when I'm walking structure, looking at connections, where things meet, where the fence met the drainage channel, where the old fence posts had been replaced, and where they hadn't, which sections were newer. And behind the generator building, slightly hidden by the angle of the structure, I found a gate. Small, single-person width, chain link, like the rest of the fence, but with a different kind of latch. Not a combination lock, a bolt. From the inside, you just slid the bolt and the gate opened. I opened it. Outside the gate was a narrow path through the pines that I hadn't seen from any other angle. It went north, toward the dam access road. Larry the watchman, the guy who'd given me the lockbox code. He must have used this path regularly, rather than going all the way around to the main gate and relocking every time. A shortcut to wherever his truck went, maybe. Or, whoever had been living in that mobile unit had used it to come and go, without being seen from the access road. I didn't know which. Both possibilities lived in my head simultaneously for the next several days. Day 5 was also the day I first heard the sound clearly. It was evening. Ray was in the office on the CB. Diane was going through the supply inventory for the 3rd time, doing the thing she does where she recounts and recategorizes and tries to find efficiencies I'd missed. I was on the equipment bay roof, my lookout spot. It had become that. And the wind had dropped to nothing, and the air was very still, the way October air gets still in the hour before full dark. And I heard it. Not the vague frequency I'd heard on day 1, clearly now. A sound like water moving, but not quite. And underneath it something, I don't know. Something that a sound shouldn't have underneath it. A sort of, I keep trying to describe this and landing on the wrong words. A harmonic, like there was a low note under the main sound. Not mechanical, not an engine. Something in a range that I felt more in my chest than heard with my ears. I turned toward it, south, from the direction of the field. And in the field, visible in the last of the evening light, there were 3 of them, not 1, like yesterday morning. 3. Moving in the same wrong-speed way, not together exactly, not coordinated, just all moving in roughly the same direction, which was north, which was toward us. I got down off the roof very carefully and went inside without making a sound, and said to Ray in a very low voice, "We have company in the south field." He came and looked through the gap in the equipment bay door. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "They'll hit the fence." I said, "I know. How much noise will that make?" He said, "Depends on how hard they hit." We watched. It took about 8 minutes for them to cross the field. They didn't move in a straight line. They wandered, changed direction, doubled back slightly, moved forward again. When the first one hit the fence, it made a sound, not a crash, a sustained pushing noise, a continuous pressure against the chain link. The fence vibrated. The second one reached the fence about 30 seconds later. The third, a minute after that. They pushed at the fence, not trying to climb it, not finding weak points, just pushing against the thing that was there. We sat in the equipment bay in the dark, no lights, no movement, and listened to them push at the fence. After about 40 minutes, they stopped. I couldn't tell if they moved away or just went still. I waited another 30 minutes, then went to the gap in the roll-up door and looked. The field was empty. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Ray said, quietly, 3. I said, yeah. He said, there are going to be more. I said, I know. We started reinforcing the fence the next morning. The thing about chain link fence under sustained pressure is not that it breaks. Good chain link won't break from a few bodies pressing against it. The thing is that it bends. The posts pull at the foundation bolts. The tension in the mesh redistributes and concentrates at specific points, usually at the gate hardware and at the post bases, and over time, with enough consistent pressure, it deforms. I know this the way I know bridge failure modes. You don't fight that with more fence. You fight it with support structures that carry the load differently. We used steel pipe from the equipment bay. There were about a dozen 6-foot sections in the tool rack, and we threaded them through the chain link vertically and horizontally, connecting them to the existing fence posts with cable ties and wire, creating a grid reinforcement. It made the fence significantly stiffer. It wasn't beautiful and it wasn't engineered to any standard, but it would hold considerably better than it had. We also, with the Bobcat, pushed more material up against the outside of the south fence, the remaining large rocks, plus the contents of a broken-down wooden pallet I found behind the equipment bay, plus soil, creating a crude berm that averaged about 2 feet high against the bottom of the fence. The idea being that something approaching from the south would have to step up onto the berm to reach the fence, which would slow it and change the angle of impact. Ray did something I wouldn't have thought of. He strung aluminum cans on wire along the inside perimeter of the fence, about 6 inches from the chain link, at roughly waist height. He used wire from a spool in the tool rack and cans from our recycling. The idea was that anything heavy enough to move the fence would rattle the cans. Not a sophisticated alarm system, but something. Day 6. The broadcast from the north access point was still running. On day 6 evening, I made a decision. I got the handheld radio and went to the north gate in the back fence, the one behind the generator building, and I slid the bolt and went out through the pines, following the path, and I came out on the dam access road. The dam access road is paved, 2 lanes, runs along the crest of a ridge with Kellam Lake to your right, and the watershed below to your left. The dam itself is at the far end. At this end, there was a maintenance vehicle parking area, empty now, and a chain across the road and a sign. I stood there for a moment. Then I walked the road toward the dam, staying to the edge, keeping my footfall quiet, and after about 100 yards I could see it. Lights. Not bright lights, not generator lights. Lantern lights, probably propane, in the windows of the dam operator's building, which sat at the east end of the dam crest, and a vehicle in the lot outside it. I stood there and watched, saw a figure in one of the windows, backlit, just standing. I was probably 200 yards away. I didn't want to call out. I got the radio and clicked to the frequency, waited. The broadcast was still playing. When it cycled back to the beginning, I held down the talk button and said, "This is someone at the maintenance compound on the south access. I can see your lights. There are 3 of us. Are you actually there?" Oh, silence. The broadcast cycle started again. Then a voice, not the recorded one, a real live voice, a woman. "South compound, say again." I said, 3 of us, 2 men, 1 woman. We've been here since day 1. Are you at the dam station? She said, "Yes." "How many did you say?" 3. A pause. "How are you fixed for supplies?" "Reasonably well. Fuel, food, water, tools. How are you?" Another pause, longer. "We have 6 people. 2 of us have medical training. We have some food and water, but we are low on fuel for the generator." I stood on the dam access road in the dark with the stars above Kellam Lake very clear and cold, And I thought about the notebook in the mobile unit, and tea, and the drop, and someone who had known something was coming. And I thought about 6 people at the dam station with medical training and no fuel. I said, "We'll come up tomorrow, daylight." She said, "We'll be here." Her name, I found out the next day, was Nora Ashby, 43, a civil engineer who had specialized in hydraulic systems. She had been at the dam doing an annual inspection of the spillway gates when the outbreak hit. She had a colleague with her named Pete Larch, who was a dam operator for the state, and 4 other people who had arrived over the first 4 days. 2 by walking up the dam access road, 2 in a truck who'd found the north gate the same way we'd found the south. One of the 4 arrivals, a woman named Carol who was a retired paramedic, was the medical capability Nora had mentioned. They were exactly what they sounded like. 6 scared, practical people who had found their way to a defensible location and were doing their best. The compound and the dam station were, together, more than either was alone. This was obvious within the first hour of meeting Nora. The dam had structural integrity, water access, and medical capacity. The compound had fuel, tools, and the Bobcat. 2 locations, connected by a 300-yard road, both defensible, each supplying something the other lacked. Over the next 2 days, we established communication protocols, shared inventory lists, and began running a diesel transfer. We used a hand pump and 50-gallon drums from the compound to move diesel up the dam road in the truck. 2 loads, restoring the dam generator to operational status. This was the shape of our world on day 8, and my father hadn't called back. I need to tell you what I was doing with that, in the inside of my head, over those first 8 days, because I don't think it was what you'd expect. I wasn't in denial. I wasn't in panic. I was doing something more specific than either of those. I was managing the possibility of the worst case, the way I manage a failing structure. You catalog the evidence. You assess the load path. You identify the redundancies. You do not let the worst-case scenario become your operational assumption until the evidence forces you there, because if you do that before the evidence is in, you make bad decisions. My father was 68. He was in a small town. He was not the kind of person who went toward crowds or toward noise. His house was solid, he had a garage with tools, and I knew his pantry was stocked because his pantry was always stocked. He bought in bulk from the grocery warehouse, and he had cases of things. Pasta, soup, tomato sauce, always, because that was how he'd cooked since my mother died 15 years ago, and he'd learned to do his own shopping. He had a pickup in the driveway with a full tank because he filled it every Sunday without exception. He could be okay. He could be fine. He might be sitting in his house right now not calling because he was conserving his phone battery and he knew I'd come when I could. Or he could not be okay, and I was managing that with the same clinical part of my brain that manages bridge failure modes. On day 8, I told Diane I was going. She didn't fight it. She said, "I'm going with you." I said, "You're safer here." She said, "Maybe, but you're safer with me." We went back and forth on this. We went back and forth in the specific way that 2 people go back and forth when they both know the outcome, but need to do the conversational circuit anyway. She was coming. She'd made the decision before she brought it up, which is how Diane operates. She presents things as discussions, but they're usually already decisions. I said, "Ray?" Ray said, "I'll hold down the compound. Nora's people can come down if there's trouble." I said, "You're sure?" He said, "I'll be fine. Go get your old man." We planned it over the next 2 days. Day 9 and 10 were prep days. Route to Belfield. This was the problem. The direct route, through the county roads and then south on Route 7 and then east on 44, was about 55 miles, but ran through 3 town centers and 2 highway interchanges. I didn't know what those looked like now. The CB and the radio traffic had given us fragments, but not a clear picture. Towns had infected, that much was certain. The interchanges and highway on-ramps had been described by various CB users as blocked and choked, which I took to mean abandoned vehicles. I knew another route. This is the part where the bridge inspection knowledge matters most, and I want to be specific about it. My survey area for the past 3 years had covered what the DOT called the Eastern Watershed Corridor, which was a series of roads and bridges that ran along the edge of the state forest and the watershed district, connecting various maintenance access points. On standard road maps, these roads existed but were labeled as seasonal or closed to public routes. Most of them were paved, barely, chip-sealed sometimes, but drivable in a capable vehicle. My truck was a 17 F-250, with 4-wheel drive and all-terrain tires, which I'd spec'd for fieldwork. There was a route. If I used 5 separate maintenance access points and 3 bridges that were on my inspection list, that would take me from the Kellum compound area to within about 8 miles of Belfield without touching a single public road used by significant traffic. It was longer, probably 80 miles total instead of 55. It would take 2.5, maybe 3 hours instead of 1, but it would not go through any town center. It would not touch the highway, and I knew every mile of it. The 3 bridges on this route were all ones I'd personally inspected. I knew their current condition. 2 were in good shape. 1 had a deck issue I'd flagged, a section of the concrete deck on the east lane showing significant transverse cracking, but it was still rated for loads up to 25 tons, and my truck was under 4 tons loaded. It would hold. I mapped the full route on paper. I drew it out on a page from the legal pad, with distances noted, landmarks noted, the 3 bridges marked with their identifier codes. I gave a copy to Ray. He looked at it and said, "Smart." I said, "If we're not back in 36 hours, something went wrong." He said, "What do I do if something goes wrong?" I said, "Get Nora and start making decisions." He nodded. We left on day 11, 5:30 in the morning. Dark, cold, frost on the truck windows. Diane had the shotgun on the seat between us. I had my work bag. We'd packed food for 3 days just in case, and extra water, and a full fuel can. The first section of the maintenance route went east, along the dam access road, and then turned onto a gravel track I knew as SRE7 in my inspection logs. It ran through state forest, tall pines on both sides. No overhead clearance problem, but tight enough that branches brushed the truck mirrors. About 15 miles of this, then the first bridge. Bridge 744A, a concrete deck girder bridge over a tributary creek. I'd last inspected it 6 weeks ago. Good condition. We crossed it at 30 miles an hour, and it felt exactly the way a healthy bridge feels. Solid, no vibration, no flex you shouldn't feel. The second section took us through about 12 miles of farm fields, the road becoming chip seal, and then better pavement, then worse again. No one on it. We passed one abandoned vehicle, a station wagon with the driver's door open, pulled mostly off the road in the grass. Nobody inside. Diane watched it as we went past. Neither of us said anything. About 23 miles in, we came over a rise, and I saw the second bridge. I stopped the truck. There were 4 of them on the bridge. The bridge was a steel girder bridge, single lane, over a creek. The 4 of them were on the bridge deck, spread out, not clustered, just there. Standing, 2 of them, and 2 moving in that slow, wrong way along the guardrail, not apparently going anywhere, not apparently interested in anything in particular. I turned the engine off. We were maybe 200 yards from the bridge. Diane said, "Can we go around?" I said, "The creek's about 8 feet deep and the banks are steep. Not in this truck." She said, "We could wait." I said, "They could be there for hours." She said, "So what do we do?" Here's the thing about that bridge that I knew and that Diane couldn't have known. It was a narrow bridge, single lane, with metal guardrail on both sides. If I went onto that bridge with those 4 on it, there was no room to swerve. The bridge was about 40 feet long. At any reasonable speed, 40 feet was less than 2 seconds. I said, "Here's what I think we do." Diane said, "Yeah?" I said, "I'm going to drive onto the bridge fast and not stop. They're spread out on the deck. At speed, if we hit any of them, we hit them and we don't stop. We go through." She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Okay." I said, "Are you okay with that?" She said, "Are we going to talk about it, or are we going to do it?" I started the truck. I drove toward the bridge at a speed that felt wrong in my body. Not reckless fast, but committed fast. The kind of speed where you're telling yourself and your truck that there's no option for stopping, and your foot is saying the same thing to the accelerator. Two of them turned toward the sound of the engine when we were about 100 yards out. Not quickly, not sharply. They turned the way something turns when it registers vibration, slow and sort of stiff at the shoulders. And then we were on the bridge, and I had a fraction of a second to see them at the edges of my field of vision. One on the left, close to the guardrail, one in the middle, two more toward the far end. And I kept the wheel straight, and the accelerator down, and the middle one was in our lane, and we hit it at 43 miles an hour. The impact was, I don't know what I expected. Something more jarring, maybe. A heavier sound. What I actually felt was a strike, and then something against the front of the truck for a fraction of a second, and then we were past the bridge and on the road on the other side. I drove for another 100 yards before I slowed down. Diane had her hands flat on her thighs. She was breathing hard. I said, "Are you okay?" She said, "No, but I'm fine. Keep driving." I kept driving. We didn't talk about the bridge for about 20 minutes. Then Diane said, "I knew you were going to do that." I said, "I know." She said, "When did you decide?" I said, "When I stopped and saw them, before I told you." She said, "Good. That's the right way to do it." I looked at her. She said, "You decide, then you commit, then you tell me. Don't ask me to decide something like that. I'll make us both freeze." I said, "You wouldn't have frozen." She said, "Maybe not, but this way was better." I thought about that for a long time while I drove. The maintenance route took a jog south around a quarry operation, which added about 3 miles, and then we were on a paved township road I'd used on an inspection last year, one that took us along the backside of a ridge above the valley, where Route 44 ran. I could see 44 from up here, through gaps in the trees. It looked like a parking lot. Not quite. Cars spread out across it, some in the lanes, some on the shoulder, a few with doors open. No movement that I could see from this distance. "That's what Route 44 looks like," I said. Diane looked. "God," I said. "We'd still be sitting in that if we'd tried it." She said, "You knew. Back at the house, when you said maintenance road, you already knew." I said, "I didn't know. I suspected." She said, "You knew. Maybe I did." The third bridge was the one with the cracked deck. Bridge CR7 in my notes. A concrete box beam structure over a drainage crossing. I knew every crack on this bridge. I'd measured them with a crack comparator gauge 6 weeks ago. I'd photographed them. I'd written a report saying, "Minor to moderate transverse cracking on east span. No active deterioration. Recommend monitoring." I crossed it at 20 miles an hour. Not because I thought it would fail. It wouldn't. Not from my truck. But because I wanted to feel how it felt. Because I was a man who knew bridges, and I needed to know. It felt fine. On the far side of that bridge, the road intersected a township road that came from the direction of a small village called Pratt Crossing. About 2 miles ahead, according to my route notes, we'd have to cross through Pratt Crossing itself, which had maybe 600 people, to get to the road that would take us the last 8 miles into Belfield. I slowed the truck at the intersection and looked at the road toward Pratt Crossing. A fire truck, facing us, stopped in the middle of the road, maybe a 1/4 mile ahead, not crashed, just stopped. "Can we go around it?" Diane asked. I looked at the shoulder, soft. The fire truck was at the curve of the road where the town began, and on either side of the road were drainage ditches. Maybe, if we can get onto the shoulder without sinking. I drove slow toward it. 50 yards from the fire truck I stopped. There was no one on or near the fire truck that I could see. The engine was running. I could hear it faintly with the windows down, that diesel engine rumble, and see the exhaust from the pipe above the cab. Running. The engine had been running long enough that the crew had left it and not come back. Long enough to still be running now. I went around on the left shoulder and the ground held, and we cleared the ditch and came back onto the road past the fire truck. And then we were in Pratt Crossing. I don't want to spend too much time describing what Pratt Crossing looked like, because it's the kind of thing that once you've seen it, you don't fully leave behind, and there's a point where describing it in detail stops being useful and starts being something else. What I'll say is, it was not okay. It was not okay in a way that was different from the abandoned car on the maintenance road, or the fire truck with its engine running. There was evidence of what had happened, and some of that evidence was visible, and some of it I made a decision not to look directly at, and we went through the town in about 90 seconds on the main road, and came out the other side, and I kept driving. Diane had her eyes forward. She put her hand on my forearm. She didn't say anything. She kept her hand there. The last 8 miles to Belfield were on a road I'd never been on in my life. Not for work, not for any reason. It ran through farmland, mostly, with occasional residential clusters. We passed 3 farms, 2 with no obvious activity, and 1 where there were lights on in the house windows, which felt so normal and so wrong simultaneously that I had to resist the urge to stop. Belfield came into view as we came over a low hill about a mile out. It was bigger than Pratt Crossing. A few thousand people, a proper main street with actual businesses, a water tower with Belfield painted on it in blue letters. From the hill it looked, in the morning light, almost like a normal small town. Quiet, but not destroyed. Almost. There was a plume of gray smoke rising from somewhere in the middle of town. I drove in carefully, slowly, with the windows down. No one on the main street. A few abandoned vehicles, but not many. A pharmacy with its front window broken. A barber shop with the door standing open. The little striped pole still slowly turning, because someone had left it running. A coffee shop that looked undisturbed except for a table knocked over, visible through the window. Maple Court was 3 blocks south of Main. I knew the turn. My father's street. I'd been here dozens of times. A residential street of older colonials, mature trees, the kind of street where leaves are always falling in October, and where people keep their gutters clear because they take pride in maintenance. I'd grown up in this town, not on this street, but near enough that I knew its shape. My father's house was the 3rd one on the left. His truck was in the driveway. I stopped the truck in front of the house and sat there for a moment. The truck being there was good. It meant he probably hadn't tried to leave, or it meant he hadn't been able to. I was very carefully not letting myself go to that second possibility. The front yard was normal. The maple tree he'd planted when I was 6 was losing its leaves. The gutters looked like they needed cleaning. Diane said, "The front door's closed." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Windows?" I looked. Closed. Blinds down. She said, "That's what you'd do. Close everything. Close the blinds." It was. I got the shotgun and said, "Stay in the truck until I knock." She started to say something. I looked at her. She said, "Okay." I got out and walked up the path to the front door. The air smelled like leaves and cold. My footsteps on the concrete path. A squirrel in the maple tree that stopped whatever it was doing and watched me. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder, and said, "Dad, it's Joel." A sound from inside. Movement. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. My father's walk. He's got a bad left knee that he's been ignoring for years. The door opened. Walt Carver, 6 feet, gray, the kind of face that has been weathered into something that looks reliable. He was wearing a flannel shirt and work pants, and he had a hunting rifle in his right hand, barrel pointed at the floor. He looked at me. He said, "Took you long enough." I actually laughed. It came out in a way I wasn't expecting. A half laugh that had something else in it. Something not quite laughing, and I had to breathe for a second. I said, "You knew I was coming?" He said, "I figured you'd come when you could. I stopped calling because I didn't want to run down the battery, and I knew you'd come." I said, "You okay?" He said, "I'm fine. Come in. Don't let the door stand open." I went in. He closed and relocked the door. He'd been busy. This is the thing about my father that I should have predicted, and somehow managed to underpredict. He'd boarded up the back windows with plywood from the garage. He keeps full sheets of plywood in the garage because he was always doing some project. He'd pushed the furniture in the dining room to the walls and set up what he'd told himself was a work area in the center, a folding table with tools on it, spare lumber, screws. He'd filled every container he had with water when the municipal water pressure dropped on day 2. He'd raided his own pantry and set it up in an organized system on the dining room table, labeled by caloric value, which is an insane level of organization for a 68-year-old retired mechanic, but that is, once again, exactly who he is. He'd also reinforced the basement door with an additional bolt, and the front door, and both side doors. He had a battery-powered radio running on low in the kitchen, the kind you use for camping. He said, "I figured whoever was outside would hear noise and come toward it, so I stopped making noise, closed the fireplace damper, haven't cooked anything that smells." I said, "You figured that out on your own?" He said, "It's not complicated. Animals go toward food and noise. Whatever these things are, they seemed like animals." I sat down at his kitchen table, and I put my face in my hands for just a moment. Just a moment. He said, "You want coffee?" I've been making it cold because I didn't want the smell, but I could heat it. I said, Yeah, I want coffee." He said, "Is that your truck? Is Diane with you?" I said, "She's in the truck." He said, "Go get her. She shouldn't be out there." I went and got Diane. She came inside, and my father hugged her, and she hugged him back, and the three of us stood in his kitchen for a moment. Then she pulled back and looked at him and said, "You look fine." He said, "I am fine. I told Joel that." She said, "Did you have everything you needed?" He said, "Mostly. Ran out of decent coffee on day 3. Everything else? Fine." She said, "We have supplies in the truck. We're going to load you up and take you with us." He said, "Where to?" I said, "A maintenance compound about 50 miles from here. It's defensible. There are other people, medical capability." He looked at me. "Maintenance compound. How'd you find that?" I said, "I inspected the bridges near it." He nodded slowly. "Of course you did." He was packed in 40 minutes. This is also exactly who my father is. He didn't deliberate. He had a bag already mostly assembled, sitting by the bedroom door, because he'd thought, at some point, I might need to move fast. He added things from his pantry, his tools, 2 boxes of rifle ammunition, a set of winter clothes, his medications, his wallet, a photograph of my mother from the bedroom dresser. That last one he tucked into his shirt pocket without saying anything. I saw it. I didn't say anything either. We loaded his truck with everything useful from the garage: lumber, fasteners, a welder he had in there, 2 propane canisters, more rope and chain and tools. I looked at the welder and thought, that's going to matter. We left Belfield at 11 a.m., my truck first, my father following in his, and we went back the way we'd come. I need to tell you about what happened on the way back, because this is one of the parts I've spent the most time processing. We were about 30 miles out from the compound, on the section of maintenance road that runs through state forest, when I saw a figure at the side of the road. Not moving, standing still, watching the road. I slowed. It was a woman, maybe late 20s. She was wearing what had once been hospital scrubs, now torn and dirty, with a zip-up sweatshirt over them. She was standing at the edge of the tree line, and when our headlights hit her, she didn't move away. She didn't run. She just stood there. She was not one of the infected. I could tell that immediately. The posture was wrong for that. She was still, intentionally still, the way a person is still when they're trying to decide if something is safe. Her eyes tracked the truck. I stopped. Diane said, "That's someone." I said, "I know." I got out carefully, slowly. I left the door open. I said, "Hey, can you hear me?" She said, from the edge of the tree line, "Are you?" Her voice came out rough, like she hadn't used it in a while. "Are you going somewhere safe?" I said, "Yeah, we are." She looked at my truck and my father's truck behind it. She said, "My name is Gwen, and that is how we found Diane's sister. She'd been in the woods for 3 days. She'd walked north from Harwick, like Diane had said, and she'd found a hunting cabin in the state forest that was unlocked, and she'd stayed there for 2 days, and then she'd started walking again because she'd heard vehicles on the maintenance road, hours from the morning trip out, apparently, and she'd come toward the road. Diane got out of the truck and I moved out of the way. I don't know what the right word is for what happened in the next 2 minutes. Diane and her sister in the road in the October forest, and the silence of those trees. I went and stood by my father's truck window. He looked at me. He said, "Who is that?" I said, "Gwen, Diane's sister." He looked at them in the road. He said, "Well?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "That doesn't happen. That's not the kind of thing that happens." I said, "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "But here it is." Gwen got in the back of my truck with Diane. She was dehydrated and hadn't eaten much in 3 days, and she had a cut on her right forearm that she'd cleaned with water, but that needed better attention. She wasn't bitten. I asked her directly and she understood why I was asking, and she answered directly. She'd treated 2 bite victims at the hospital before she got out. She knew what it meant. She wasn't bitten. She talked in the truck, starting slow and then not slow at all. She talked about what the hospital had been like. The first patients who came in, 4 of them, and the way none of them responded to anything they said or did, except to lunge when someone got close. The way one of them died in the restraint bed, and they'd all been standing there trying to figure out what had killed him, and then he'd come back up again, pulling at the restraints. The way the ER director had made a decision in about 30 seconds. The right decision, Gwen thought, to get non-essential personnel out and barricade the ER. The way that decision had saved about 20 people, and also meant the 12 people in the ER wing couldn't get out when it got worse. She talked about that. I let her talk. Diane held her hand. I kept my eyes on the road. We got back to the compound at 3 in the afternoon. Ray was at the gate when we pulled up. He opened it and counted us. Me, Diane, Gwen in my truck, my father in his. He looked at the addition without surprise. He said, "Found your old man." I said, "And Diane's sister." He looked at Gwen for a moment. She was pale and tired and still in hospital scrubs. He said, "She a nurse?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Good." Like that was exactly the right thing to have found. My father pulled his truck in. He got out and looked around the compound, taking stock. I watched him do it. He had a mechanic's eye for systems and equipment, and he went through the same process I'd gone through on day 1. Where's everything? What condition is it in? What does it do? He walked to the equipment bay and looked inside. He looked at the Bobcat. He said, "You've used this?" I said, "Ray taught me." He said, "What's the hydraulic fluid situation?" I said, "There's a full case in the bay." He said, "Good." He looked at the Bobcat for another moment. "I can get more out of that machine than you can." I said, "I believe you." He said, "I'm just saying." I said, "I know you're just saying, Dad." He almost smiled. Almost. The first night with everyone together was different from the previous nights, in a way that I wasn't prepared for. 7 people in the office building, eating a proper meal. Diane had cooked actual pasta on the electric stove, with a can of tomato sauce and dried herbs from the cabinet, and it was the best thing I'd eaten in 2 weeks. And the noise of conversation after days of enforced quiet was strange. Not bad. Just strange. Like sound had a different weight than I'd gotten used to. Nora Ashby came down from the dam station with Pete Larch, and there were introductions. And there was the kind of provisional social organization that happens when a group of adults who don't know each other find themselves in the same situation. Ray and my father immediately started comparing notes on the fence reinforcement, and my father started talking about the welder in his truck, and Ray's expression changed in the way it changes when someone shows you that they have exactly the tool you didn't know you needed. Gwen and Nora sat in the corner and talked for a long time. Nora had her own things to process. She'd seen things at the dam in the first 2 days. One of her inspection crew who hadn't made it to the dam station before the roads went wrong. Someone she'd worked with for 3 years, who she couldn't reach by phone or radio. She'd been holding that together with the particular kind of competence that people use to hold hard things together. Gwen was a trauma nurse. She knew how to be in the room with someone who was holding something. I sat with the radio and listened to the CB traffic and thought. There was a piece of the situation that I hadn't been able to address yet, because there had always been a more immediate thing, but it was sitting in the back of my head and getting heavier. The notebook in the mobile unit, the drop. The phrase, "something's coming." Someone had used this compound, recently, for something they didn't want known, and whatever that something was, it had been connected to, what? The infection? Could someone have known about the infection before it happened? That seemed like a question with very dark implications. Or could it be unrelated? Someone using a government facility for some other unauthorized purpose, and the timing was coincidence. I took the notebook out again and went through it more carefully. Reading it a second time, some things became clearer and some things got murkier. The entries weren't a diary in any personal sense. They were more like operational notes. Check in at the drop, pick up the package, route change because of construction on Route 9. It read like someone who was running some kind of supply operation. Not drugs, at least not obviously. The packages were never described in a way that indicated what was in them. Just package, drop, route, T. T had to be a person, someone's initial, someone this person was coordinating with. One entry, 3 months before the final one. T says the source is concerned about containment. We may need to move the timeline up. I said we can't rush the end stage. Containment isn't our problem. T disagreed, left it there. Containment. I sat with that word for a while. Diane came and sat next to me. She read over my shoulder for a moment. She said, "You've been looking at that again." I said, "Yeah." She said, "What does containment mean to you?" I said, "It depends on what the source is. If someone is shipping something biological and they're worried about containment." She said, "You think this is related?" I said, "I don't know. The timeline is interesting." She said, "Joel." I said, "Yeah." She said, "We can't do anything about what caused this. Right now." I said, "I know." She said, "So maybe that can wait." She was right. She was almost always right about when I was spending time on the unknowable instead of the actionable. It was one of the things I relied on her for in a way I didn't always acknowledge. I put the notebook away. The weeks that followed had a rhythm that I want to describe carefully because I think the rhythm of it matters. We settled into the compound, all 7 of us. And then, after another week, 9, because 2 more survivors arrived, a man named Dennis, who was a high school chemistry teacher from the next county, and his teenage son, Kyle, made the compound work. We established routines around the fence, around food, around the generator, around communication. My father and Ray between them did things with the welding equipment and the bobcat that I wouldn't have thought of. They welded steel angle iron along the fence base inside the perimeter, making it harder to pull outward, and they extended the height of the fence on the south side by a foot using the steel pipe from the equipment bay. They figured out how to rig the bobcat so it could do the work of a person plus a hand truck, moving heavy materials around the compound that would have been exhausting and noisy to move by hand. Dennis, the chemistry teacher, turned out to have a specific skill that no one expected. He'd been an amateur radio operator for 20 years and had an intimate knowledge of radio frequencies that went considerably beyond what any of us had. Within 3 days of arriving, he'd reconfigured our radios to pick up signals we hadn't been receiving, including what appeared to be some kind of coordinated survivor network operating on a rotating frequency schedule. People checking in from different locations, sharing information, reporting on local conditions. That network told us things. The infection had been confirmed by whatever remained of federal emergency management as a pathogen, not a chemical, not a weapon, a pathogen that crossed some kind of barrier into human transmission, probably from wildlife, possibly with an accelerating factor that wasn't natural. That last part was unofficial, fragmentary, carried in whispers on the radio by people who said they'd heard from someone who'd heard from someone in the response chain, not confirmed. But it mapped, uncomfortably, to what I'd read in the notebook about containment and source and the end stage. I'm not going to tell you I know what happened. I don't. I have pieces that could fit together in a dark way, or could fit together in a way that means nothing. I've decided to stop trying to make them fit. Diane was right about that. The thing that mattered, in practical terms, was this. 7 weeks after the outbreak, we had a functioning compound with 9 people. Enough fuel to run the generator 4 hours a day for probably another 6 months. Food for roughly 40 days at current consumption, with rationing applied. A medical capability in Gwen and Carol, the retired paramedic. A mechanical capability in my father and Ray. And a communication and intelligence capability in Dennis. We had the fence, reinforced. We had a protocol for the infected that involved a lot of not making noise, a lot of patience, and a decision not to go outside at night. We had the Bobcat available for heavy work. We had the dam and its water. We also had, on the north side of the dam, a fishing resource in Kellam Lake that none of us had thought about in the first few weeks, and that Dennis's son Kyle had pointed out on about day 14 when he'd gotten bored and picked up a piece of rod and reel from the tackle box Ray had brought. Kyle had come back with 2 bass. He'd looked faintly embarrassed about being proud of it. Ray had told him there was nothing to be embarrassed about. My father had cleaned the fish in about 4 minutes flat, the way a man who spent 30 years taking his son fishing does it without thinking, and we'd fried them in the frying pan we'd found in the office cabinet. That had been a good meal. There were hard things too. I'm not going to pretend it was just logistics and fish. Dennis's son Kyle had nightmares that we all heard because the walls weren't thick. Gwen had 2 days in the 3rd week where she didn't get out of bed. Really didn't. Not until I went and sat in the room with her and asked if she wanted to talk, and she said she wanted me to just sit there. So I sat there. Pete Larch, from the dam station, was dealing with something about the colleague he'd lost that he hadn't processed, and you could see it in him, in the way he moved through the days with a kind of deliberate efficiency that was actually a way of not standing still long enough to feel anything. Ray missed his daughter. He'd heard nothing from her since day 1, when he'd tried calling and gotten no answer. He didn't talk about it often. He was not the kind of person who talked about things often, but you could hear it sometimes, in the particular quality of his silence when someone mentioned someone they'd been worried about who'd turned out okay. My father was fine. This was both the most expected and least expected thing. He was fine in the way that someone is fine who has survived a lot of things in a long life and has made a private peace with the fact that things end and things change, and the day you're in is the day you have. He worked every day. He slept through the nights. He ate everything on his plate. He told Kyle about bass fishing in a way that was somehow also a story about paying attention and about what water does at different temperatures and about being patient. And Kyle listened in the way that teenagers listen when they don't want to admit they're interested. I watched my father doing that and I thought, 68 years old, and this is the version of him that the world got. This version, calm and useful and practical, who can look at a problem and find the working part of it. I don't know how long we'll be here. That's the honest answer. I don't know what's happening in the cities. I don't know when or if any kind of organized response is going to reach this area. I don't know how long the infected remain active, or whether they can be. I don't know. Dennis's radio network provides information, but not conclusions. People are surviving in scattered locations. There's no cavalry. There's this. On a day in early December, 6 weeks after the outbreak, I climbed up on the equipment bay roof the way I did every morning, and I looked south. No new smoke columns. None for the past 12 days. The south field was empty. It had been empty, of infected, for 4 consecutive mornings, which could mean they'd moved on. It could mean other things too, but I was choosing to take the 4 consecutive empty mornings as provisionally good news. The sky was very blue and very cold, and there was snow on the grass in the field, a thin cover, the first snow of the season. Ray came out from the equipment bay and looked up at me. He said, "Anything?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "That's something." I said, Yeah, it is." He went back inside. I stayed up there for a while. I looked at the dam, its crest visible above the pines. I looked at the drainage channel, the water still moving in it, because water in concrete-lined channels doesn't freeze even in cold weather. I looked at the maintenance road, the gravel disappearing south into the trees. And I thought about something my father had said at dinner the night before, offhand. Not really directed at me specifically. Just something he said. The thing about a good structure is it doesn't fight what it has to hold. It distributes it, spreads it across what's strong. He'd been talking about the fence reinforcement. I knew that. But I was sitting up on the equipment bay roof in the December cold, thinking about it in a different way. We were still here, all 9 of us. A bridge inspection engineer, his nurse wife's sister, a county road foreman, a retired mechanic, a hydraulic engineer, a dam operator, a retired paramedic, a chemistry teacher, and a teenager who was getting very good at catching bass. Not because we'd found the right answer, not because anyone had shown up and saved us, because of what we happened to know, and where we happened to be, and the kind of luck that feels too specific to call luck, and 55 miles of back roads and maintenance tracks and 3 bridges. The cracked one held. I don't know what that means, except that sometimes, the thing you've been inspecting, the thing you've been measuring the damage in, and writing the reports about, and saying it's okay for now, it holds when you need it to. And sometimes that's enough. Let me back up and give you something I've been meaning to get to, because I realize I've been moving through this in a mostly forward direction, and I've been skipping over something that I think is part of why I'm still sitting here trying to put it all into words. 3 nights before the outbreak, the night before Diane woke me up, I had been alone in the motel room with the smell of carpet cleaner and old smoke, and I'd been doing something I do at the end of a survey week. I'd been writing up my field notes, the rough notes from the week, transferring the measurements and observations from the yellow notepads I carry on inspections to a more organized document on my laptop. And I'd been writing about a bridge I'd inspected that day, the last bridge of the week, Bridge CR-12, a 5-span concrete girder bridge over a river that marked the county boundary. An old bridge, 1961, one of the ones that showed its age in specific ways. The concrete carbonated on the soffits of the end spans, the bearings in the pier caps showing signs of restraint that they shouldn't have. Not failing, not close to failing, but carrying 100 years of weather and load in its concrete, and showing you, if you looked at the right places, what that had done. I'd written in my notes, load distribution appears satisfactory, despite localized deterioration. Structure continues to perform its primary function. Load distribution appears satisfactory despite localized deterioration. I have thought about that sentence every single day since this happened. Because that's us. That's all of us here. That's this compound and the dam and the 9 people in it, and the fence with the steel pipe woven through it, and the bobcat and the welder in the truck, and the CB radio and the fishing rods, and the 200 gallons of diesel and the Sawyer filter. Localized deterioration everywhere. Things wrong in specific ways. Things damaged and depleted and lost. But the load distributed, spread across what's strong, performing the primary function. I don't know what happens next. I'm telling you this not as someone who has arrived somewhere, but as someone who is in the middle of something whose shape isn't clear yet. The radio network Dennis monitors is starting to suggest that there are organized groups in 2 cities in the state that have some kind of institutional support, government remnant maybe, or some other organized structure. There may be a way to connect with them. There may be a way to get information about what's actually happening, about whether the infection is running its course, about whether there are roads open that weren't open a month ago. My father said, when I told him about the radio network. So there's a plan. I said, there's the beginning of a plan. He said, that's the same thing. Maybe it is. I want to tell you about the morning of the 15th day, specifically, because it contains something that I've been holding on to. I was awake early, the way I always am now. 5:30, and the compound was quiet, and I'd gone out in the cold with my coffee, instant, from a jar we'd found in a cabinet, not great but warm, and I'd been sitting on an upturned bucket by the equipment bay door, looking east at the drainage channel, which was running quiet and silver in the early light. And I heard something from outside the fence. Not a fence-hitting sound, not the sound from the south field, something different, something from the north, from the direction of the dam access road. A voice, a human voice. talking, not shouting, but clearly there. I got up carefully and went to the back of the compound, to the north fence, and I listened. The voice was coming from the damn road. Moving, I thought. Someone walking, talking. More than one voice. At least two. I went through the back gate and along the path through the pines, slowly, not making noise, and I came to the edge of the dam road and stopped. Two people, walking south on the dam road, coming in our direction. One was a woman, maybe 30, in a canvas jacket and hiking boots, with a pack on her back. The other was a man about the same age, lighter pack, walking with a slight limp. They were talking to each other in low voices. I could hear the tone but not the words. They hadn't seen me yet. I stepped out from the tree line and said quietly, "Hey." They both stopped hard. The woman took a step back. The man put his hand on her arm. I said, "Easy. I'm not." I held up both hands. "I'm not dangerous. My name is Joel Carver. I'm from the maintenance compound." I pointed back toward the pines. They looked at me, looked at each other. The woman said, "Is there really a compound? We saw the gate on the access road and we heard." I said, "There's a compound. There are 9 people. There's food and shelter and a medical person." I paused. "Where did you come from?" The man said, "Route 9. We've been walking for 3 days. We were in a shelter that didn't work out." He said the last part carefully, the way people say things carefully, when the full version isn't something they want to say right now. I nodded. "There's a fence on the compound. We've reinforced it. It's as secure as we can make it." The woman said, "How many people did you say?" I said 9. "We'll be 11 if you want to come in." They looked at each other again. The man said, Yeah, we want to come in." Their names were Luke and Abby. He'd been a paramedic, which made Gwen very happy in a professional way. And she'd been a school teacher who was now very clearly someone tougher than a school teacher, because 3 days walking from wherever, with a pack in October, had not visibly broken her. 11 people. We're 11 people. I keep thinking about the fence and the load distribution, and what my father said about spreading it across what's strong. Every person here has something they know, something they can do, something specific to them that turns out to be exactly the kind of thing you need. I didn't engineer that. I didn't recruit for it. It just assembled, person by person, the way things assemble when the conditions are right and people are moving toward the thing that makes sense. Luke, the paramedic, had something to add to the medical situation that changed our approach to security. He'd seen enough of the infected, in 3 days on the road, to have made careful observations. He was the kind of person who makes careful observations even when careful observations are the last thing you want to be making, because he'd been a paramedic, and paramedics look at injured things and catalog what they see without the luxury of looking away. He told us, the evening of the day they arrived, over dinner, they don't sleep. I never saw one stop moving for long, but they slow down in the cold, significantly. When the temperature was below 40, the ones I saw were moving, but slow, not the fast lurch, more like walking through something thick. I said, "What temperature?" He said, "Below 40. Maybe below 35 is when it really changed." I looked at my father. He looked at me. November in our county averages below 40 overnight, sometimes below 30. It wasn't a solution, but it was a variable. It was something we could plan around. We talked about it for a long time after dinner. Abby, the school teacher, had kept a notebook for the 3 days she and Luke had been walking. Not an emotional diary, more like observational notes. She'd written things down because she was a teacher, and teachers write things down as a matter of professional habit. She had notes on the infected she'd seen, the roads she'd traveled, the landmarks she'd passed, the locations of anything useful she'd spotted. She had, almost without realizing it, created an intelligence document covering the 20-mile corridor between here and Route 9. There were abandoned vehicles on Route 9 itself that had supplies in them. Visible, she'd noted them in the margins. A pickup with what looked like camping gear, a van with a logo for a landscaping company, a gas station about 5 miles from the Route 9 junction that appeared largely undisturbed. We added her notes to Dennis's radio intelligence, and what Ray had gathered from the CB, and built a clearer picture of our immediate area than we'd had before. I want to tell you about the thing that happened on day 30. Day 30 was a significant day because of two things that happened on the same day, and I still don't know if there's any connection between them. The first was that Dennis found a new signal on the radio, not the Survivor network, not the AM emergency broadcast, something different. Broadcasting on a frequency that required a specific antenna configuration that Dennis had assembled over the previous week from parts he'd scavenged from Ray's truck radio and the handheld radio from the mobile unit. A signal, repeating, numerical, not a voice, numbers, groups of 5 digits, repeating in a specific pattern. Dennis said he'd heard it before, not in the current situation, before, in his radio hobby life. He said, "That's a numbers station. I've heard them on shortwave. They're usually used for encrypted communication." I said, "Someone's sending encrypted messages." He said, "Looks like, on this frequency." I said, "Can you decode it?" He said, "Not without the key. I can't. Maybe nobody around here can." I thought about the notebook in the mobile unit, T, the drop, the end stage, the source and the containment. The second thing that happened on day 30, my father found something in his truck. He'd been in his truck organizing what was left of the supplies he'd brought, consolidating and moving things around, and he'd found, in the tools storage area under the bed, something that hadn't been there when he'd loaded the truck in Belfield. He'd been certain of that, because he'd gone through that storage area specifically when packing, and it had been empty. What he found, a small waterproof case, the hard shell kind you use for electronics. Inside the case, a hard drive, the portable kind, a 2 terabyte drive, and a piece of paper with a 6-digit number written on it. He brought it to me. I looked at it for a long time. He said, "That was not in my truck when I left the house." I said, "When could it have gotten there?" He said, "Belfield, when you went in to get me. You left the truck outside." I said, "About 20 minutes." He said, "Long enough. Someone in Belfield had put a hard drive in my father's truck while we were inside." I looked at the 6-digit number. I looked at the numbers station signal that Dennis was still monitoring, the groups of 5 digits. I said, "Dennis." He came over. I showed him the number. I said, "Does this mean anything to you in the context of what you've been hearing?" He took the piece of paper and looked at it carefully. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The groups of 5, the code keys I know about, use 6 or 7 digits as the key starter for cipher groups. This could be..." He stopped. "I don't know. It could be nothing." I said, "Or..." He said, "Or it could be a key or that signal." We looked at each other. Diane was in the doorway. She'd heard all of this. She said, "Joel." I said, "I know." She said, "We can't know what's on that drive without a computer." The office building had a desktop computer on the desk. It hadn't worked since the electricity from the grid had gone down on day 3. But when we'd started running the compound generator for 4 hours a day, it had power. I plugged the drive in. The drive wasn't encrypted. It didn't need the 6-digit number. Or if it did, the number was for something else. The drive opened and had a single folder on it. The folder contained documents, 47 of them. Some were PDFs, some were spreadsheets, some appeared to be internal communications of some kind, email chains formatted into documents. I went through them in roughly 2 hours, Diane reading over my shoulder, Dennis beside her, my father in the corner with his arms crossed. I'm going to tell you what I understood from them, which is partial, because some of them used technical language I didn't know, and some of them were clearly excerpts and not full documents. There had been a research program, government adjacent, not formally government, contracted through multiple layers of institutional cover. The program had to do with agricultural biology, specifically with a fungal pathogen that had been under development for about 9 years for use in pest control on certain grain crops. The pathogen targeted a specific protein in a specific insect that infested grain storage. It had been enormously effective in trials. It had also, in later trials, shown an unexpected behavior. It could cross the species barrier into mammals under conditions of high-density contact and environmental stress. In mammals, it did not behave the way it behaved in insects. In insects, it was lethal. In mammals, it did something different. I read that section 3 times. Then I sat back. I said, "This isn't a virus." Diane said, "What?" I said, "It's a fungus. This is a fungal infection. It jumped from insects to mammals, and in mammals, it does something different than it does in insects." Dennis said, "Does the document say what it does in mammals?" I looked at the document. It says neurological. It affects the higher cortical functions first. Then, there's a progression described here, a progression of stages. I scanned. Stage 4 is described as, they call it ambulatory persistence. The organism continues to support basic motor function, even after organ failure in other systems. We all sat with that. My father said from the corner, "Ambulatory persistence." I said, "They're walking because the fungus is keeping the motor systems running, after everything else stops." Nobody said anything for a long moment. My father said, "Is that supposed to make me feel better or worse?" I said, "I'm still figuring that out." Here's what else the document said. The part that I thought about the most. The program had been terminated. There was a termination notice from a regulatory body, dated 8 months before the outbreak. The notice cited uncontrolled containment risk and ordered all sample destruction and facility decontamination. The communication chain in the documents showed that the termination had been contested. There were internal emails arguing that termination was premature, that the agricultural application was too valuable to abandon, that the containment risk had been overstated. One email, near the end of the chain, from someone identified only by initials, TF. It said, "We cannot comply with the termination order on the stated timeline. We need 4 more weeks. The end stage work is not complete. If we destroy now, we lose everything. TF. T." I read that email for a long time. The compound, the mobile unit, the sleeping bag and the empty cans. Someone using this compound months before the outbreak, regularly, for purposes they didn't want on record, coordinating with someone called T, moving packages through drop points. And in the final notebook entry, "Something's coming." Not knowing the outbreak was coming. Knowing that whatever containment measure had failed, whatever end stage they were trying to complete, was about to run out of time. I closed the laptop. I said, "We don't talk about this outside this room. Not yet." Diane said, "Why not?" I said, "Because I don't know what to do with it yet. And because knowing it doesn't change our immediate situation. We're not going to find TF. We're not going to be able to do anything with this information right now. Right now we need to..." I stopped. My father said, "We need to fix the fence." I looked at him. He said, "Metaphorically." I said, "Right." He said, "There'll be time for the other thing." Maybe there will be. Maybe there will be a time and a place and an organized structure of some kind to take 47 documents on a portable hard drive to and say, "Here's what I found." Maybe the numbers station Dennis is monitoring is connected to whatever remains of whatever agency oversaw the program that this notebook and these emails are about. Maybe the 6-digit number on the paper is a key to something that someone in Belfield wanted to get out of Belfield and into the hands of someone who could use it. I don't know. I have a lot of pieces and no picture of what they make. What I have is 11 people, a compound with a reinforced fence, enough fuel and food for now, a welder and a bobcat, and a chemistry teacher who can pick up signals most people can't hear, a nurse, and a paramedic, and a retired paramedic, a county road foreman who knows every back road in the district and has never once been wrong about a road, and a 68-year-old retired mechanic who is better at using the bobcat than I am, and who can clean a fish in 4 minutes, and who told his son, when that son was maybe 8 years old, to always know 2 ways out of anywhere you go, because you never know which one you're going to need. He said that. I remember him saying it. 2 ways out, not 1. I knew the access road and the maintenance route, and the restricted roads. I knew the gate codes and the lockbox numbers. I knew which bridges held and which ones didn't. I knew this compound from 2 visits and a set of notes. 2 ways out. Here's what I want to tell you. The thing I've been circling around this whole time. This did not happen to us because we were special, or lucky in some profound cosmic sense. It happened to us because of very specific, very mundane things. A job that made me spend 2 years driving around looking at roads nobody uses. A file on my phone where I'd saved a gate code for no particular reason. A fuel level in a truck I'd filled 2 days before any of this started. A wife who listened to her sister at 4 in the morning and made me listen too. And a man in a house on Maple Court who had the presence of mind, when the world went wrong, to board up his windows, fill his containers with water, organize his pantry by caloric value, and wait. I've thought a lot about what the right word is for what we've built here. The 11 of us, and the compound, and the dam, and the radio network, and Abby's notebook, and Dennis's antenna, and the bobcat, and the fish in Kellam Lake. I keep coming back to something basic, something almost too simple to say. We're still here. In the south field this morning. 2 deer. Not infected, just deer. Moving through the snow cover at the edge of the tree line, the way deer move. Cautious and specific. They came to the south fence line and stood there for a moment looking at us. I was on the roof, my daily check, and then they moved back into the trees. I watched them go. Then I climbed down and went inside. My father had coffee going. He'd figured out how to use the French press we'd found in a cabinet in the mobile unit of all places, and he'd ground beans from a vacuum-sealed bag with a hand grinder Ray had in his truck. This was, objectively, way too much effort for morning coffee in our current situation. He handed me a cup. I said, "You know we could just use the instant." He said, "I know." I said, "This took you like 20 minutes." He said, "I know." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you do the things that make it feel like a life, not just a situation, a life." I looked at him. He said, "Drink your coffee." I drank my coffee. Outside the compound fence, the morning was cold and still, and the snow was blue in the early light, and the deer were gone into the pines, and the drainage channel ran steady, and the dam crest was visible above the trees, solid and old, holding the water that had been held there since 1952, performing its primary function. I've been trying to figure out how to end this account, this whatever it is, and I keep landing on the same problem, which is that things don't end, they continue. We're continuing. What I've been writing here is not the story of what happened, it's the story of what's happening, and it's not done happening. Dennis got a voice response on the numbers frequency last week. Not numbers this time. A voice. A woman, middle-aged from the sound of it, reading an address in a city about 140 miles from here and saying, "Come when you're ready, not before. Come when you're ready." We don't know what that means yet. We're thinking about it. Luke has the foot doing better. His limp is less. Abby has started teaching Kyle things. Not school subjects exactly. More like how to think about a problem. Dennis is teaching Kyle about radio. My father is teaching him about the bobcat and the fence and the hydraulic system. Kyle is a teenager, absorbing all of this with the specific teenage combination of apparent boredom and total attention. Gwen is okay. Better than okay, some days. She and Carol have set up something in the second mobile unit that serves as a medical room, properly organized, supplies cataloged. She found some medical texts in the office cabinet that someone must have used for reference during industrial accident protocols, and she's been going through them. She told me, "I want to know what we can actually treat with what we have, not what we'd normally treat in a hospital." That is a perfect Gwen sentence. Ray still monitors the CB. He knows every voice on that network by now, the way a dispatcher knows voices. He told me the other day that he thought the woman at a location 3 counties over was probably a nurse, based on the way she described the injured person in her group, and that the man who checked in every evening from somewhere east was probably former military based on his communication patterns. He builds pictures of people from what they say and how they say it. I think he's probably right about most of them. He hasn't heard anything from his daughter's city. He doesn't say much about that. I go up to the roof every morning. I look south and east and west. I note what I see and I come down and I tell Ray, and I write it in the log. We have a log now. My father's idea. He said, you should write down what you see every day, because later you'll want to know the pattern, and if you only rely on memory, you'll misremember the pattern. He's right. The log for today, as of this morning. Southfield clear, no smoke visible in any direction. Kellam Lake ice-free at the shoreline still. Temperature approximately 28 degrees. 2 deer at south tree line. No other movement noted. Fuel status. Approximately 160 gallons diesel remaining. Food status. Approximately 22 days at current consumption. Personnel. 11, all in reasonable health. Fence integrity. Good. Generator. Operational. That's where we are. Come when you're ready, the voice on the radio said. I think we're almost ready. I think we're getting there. My wife woke me up at 4 a.m. and said we have to go, and we went, and we ended up here, and here is something. It's not what any of us would have chosen or planned for, or wanted. But here is something, and we are in it together, and my father is making better coffee than I can, at 68 years old, and the deer were in the south field this morning, and the drainage channel is running, and the dam is holding, and I know 2 ways out of anywhere we need to go. That's enough. Right now, that's enough. Performing the primary function. We're still here.